Part 3, 1939. War. Memo, top secret. The key to the entire project is the use of the subject to move and control ever larger crowds through oratory. It is important to be clear about the basic method, pioneered by human politicians throughout the ages. It consists of the stimulation of such basic emotions as fear, love, hate, suspicion, pride, anger, all in regular repeated sequences. Reason and logic have little or nothing to do with it, and can actually limit the desired effect. The subject's performance still tends towards the erratic, and we must continue to strive for more effective control. I recommend a steady but gradual increase in psychic amplification. Above all, we must avoid the dangers of overload. 1. Rally. Reich Marshal Hermann Goering looked at the upraised faces, the outstretched right hands, the apparently endless sea of humanity radiating out from the speaker's podium. Searchlights, banners, torches, these Nuremberg rallies were getting weirder every year, more like some mad religious ceremony than a party political meeting. He looked round his fellow party chiefs and reflected, as he always did on these occasions, that they had all come a very long way since the old days in Munich. Meetings in shabby beer halls, making speeches to a handful of loyal supporters, wondering if you'd sold enough tickets to pay for the rent of the hall. Battles with tough communist workers, eager to bash in your skull with their beer mugs. They used to buy lots of rounds of drinks and stockpile the mugs under the tables ready to use as missiles when the speeches started. It was a rare meeting that didn't end in bloodshed and broken glass. With some surprise, Goering realised how much he actually missed the bad old days, the booze-ups and the punch-ups. It was tiring being a god, or rather a demigod. There was only one god in the party. None of his colleagues seemed to mind their elevation. They enjoyed being worshipped. Goering looked round the podium with genial contempt. There was would-be suave von Ribbentrop, ratty little Goebbels, Bormann, the king of the filing cabinets, and there, in the background as always, little Heine. Goering's smile faded as he contemplated his only serious rival in the Nazi hierarchy. A weedy little fellow with rimless glasses and a straggly moustache who looked like an unsuccessful clerk. Heinrich Himmler, Reichsführer SS, head of the dreaded Gestapo and the most feared man in Germany. Then there's me, thought Goering. What am I doing here? Born a gentleman, which is more than the rest of them can say, a diplomat's son, a war hero, commander of the famous von Richthofen squadron. He thought of his magnificent country estate at Currinhall, his collection, largely looted, of art treasures, and smiled cynically. You're doing very nicely, Hermann, he thought, just like the rest of them. Above all, always above all, there was the Führer himself, Adolf Hitler, getting up now to pay his ritual tribute to the party's glorious dead. We are all rising in the tail of the Hitler rocket, thought Goering, onwards and upwards, higher and higher. Recently he'd started to wonder how much longer it could go on. Vibrating with energy, charged as always with the adoration of the enormous crowd, Adolf Hitler walked slowly down the steps of the podium. Inside his mind, a trapped alien force writhed helplessly, sensing a vast whirlpool of psychic energy in the adoring crowd, but unable to feed upon it. She must be free, free to manipulate these human pawns to her own terrible purpose. But she was trapped. It was all she could do to survive, to conserve her sanity. The Führer's steps faltered for a moment as he was shaken by the struggle deep inside his brain. He recovered himself and moved on. Not far away, Ace and the Doctor were onlookers at the same scene. They were on top of a mound just outside a vast circle of brilliant light. The mound stood at the edge of an enormous plain packed with thousands and thousands of people. Although it was night, the plain was brilliantly lit, far more brightly than if it had been day. It was surrounded with searchlights sending columns of light into the air, converging so that a dome of light hovered over the central area. There were blazing torches everywhere, and thousands of flagpoles bearing Nazi banners. But above all there were people, row upon row, rank upon rank, black and brown uniforms at the centre, civilians crowding round at the edge. In spite of the size of the crowd, there was a deathly silence. A wide avenue divided the enormous crowd, its edges defined by stormtroopers with rifles and fixed bayonets. Down it, a single uniformed figure marched towards an altar, bearing an enormous wreath. Braziers burned around the altar, and their smoke swirled around the solitary figure. For a moment it stood motionless, then its hand rose in a stiff, almost mechanical salute. A deep-throated roar burst from the crowd, as if it came from a single giant voice. Sieg Heil! Sieg Heil! Sieg Heil! It seemed to shake the ground on which they stood. For a moment the figure held the salute, then it turned and strode back down the central avenue, ignoring the hysterical cheering of the crowd. As the solitary figure came level with the mound, Ace saw the face of the shabby, trench-coated man who'd crawled towards them in agony along the narrow street. He was older and heavier now. The white face was puffier, the ridiculous moustache a little thicker. Only the eyes, still the same intense blue, hadn't changed. They seemed brighter than ever, blazing with an unearthly light. "It's him!" whispered Ace. "That's right," said the doctor. "Adolf Hitler in person. The lad's done well, hasn't he?" At the end of the long alley, a uniformed entourage formed around Hitler, and the group disappeared from sight. Somewhere close by, cannons roared, church bells rang, a fanfare of trumpets rang out, and the crowd cheered and cheered and cheered. "You have to admit it," said the doctor. "That's real show business." Ace was amazed to realise how shaken, how moved she felt. What was it all about? "The Führer was paying tribute to the Nazi Party's glorious dead, I expect," said the doctor. "The reason doesn't matter. It's the event itself that counts. It's a primitive blood rite, a mixture of religion, politics and three-ring circus. Effective, isn't it?" "I suppose so, in a nasty kind of way." "It's orchestrated," said the doctor. "Arranged, pre-planned, by someone with a very sophisticated knowledge of the psychodynamics of crowds. Knowledge that doesn't really belong in this century." "He's being helped?" "I'm sure of it. There was someone there at the beginning, remember? The one who shot at me. I think somebody, probably a group of somebodies, has been with him ever since, guiding him, nurturing his career, boosting his powers. Did you see his eyes? I think he's controlled, possessed." "By the Timewyrm?" The doctor shook his head. "I keep telling you, it doesn't feel like her, somehow. You've seen her at work. She's about as subtle as your Nitro 9A. This sort of devious long-term temporal manipulation is a very different matter." Ace looked around the vast, floodlit arena. "Where are we, and when, come to that?" The doctor considered. "I'd say, about 15 or 16 years after that business in Munich. Our Adolf's right on top, as you can see, but I don't think the war's started yet, not with all these lights. I think we must be at Nuremberg, one of the big party rallies. They keep it up for days, you know, parades, war games, torchlight processions. Plenty of marching about, and yelling stops people thinking. And speeches, of course, endless speeches. I imagine we're due for one now. Come on." The crowd was streaming out of the vast enclosure, and the doctor moved to join them. "Hang on," said Ace. "What about the TARDIS?" "Good point." The doctor produced something that looked like a keyring and touched a concealed control. The TARDIS faded away, the noise of its departure drowned in the general din. Ace looked alarmed. "Hey, where's it gone?" "It's parked in the space-time continuum." "Well, don't lose that gadget. This may be a great place to visit, but I don't want to live here." The simple process of following the crowd led them out of the vast arena, through the streets of a picturesque old town, and up to the steps of an enormous brightly lit hall, draped, like almost every other building in the town, with enormous swastika banners. The doctor marched confidently up the steps, Ace close behind him. Through the open doors they could see that the vast hall was already jam-packed. "Let's try the upper circle," said the doctor, and headed for a marble staircase. A black-uniformed young SS captain barred their way. "The upper levels are reserved for party officials." The doctor stared at him. Then he took out his monocle, screwed it in his eye, and stared even harder. "Do you know who I am?" he whispered. "Are you aware that I am here at the personal invitation of the Führer?" The captain blenched. Your pardon, Herr. My name, like my visit, is confidential. You may address me as Herr Doctor. Kindly show me to my box. At once, Herr Doctor. The SS captain led them up the stairs, brushing other guests out of the way. At the top of the steps he halted. If the Herr Doctor would be kind enough to tell me which box? The doctor gave him another stare. The best, of course. The officer led them along the curved, red-carpeted corridor and opened the door of a box, which was occupied by a plump little man in a dark suit and an opulent blonde in an evening gown. This box is taken, said the SS captain. Out! All the lights went out. Then one spotlight came on again, focused on the gleaming steel speaker's podium. Another long pause. Then Adolf Hitler mounted the podium. He stood motionless, gazing out over the audience, the blue eyes fixed on some distant horizon. He stood silent for an amazingly long time. Suddenly he began speaking in a low tenor voice. People of Germany. The speech, like the voice, was low-key, rambling, vague, but gradually it gathered speed and strength, like a fire fanned by the wind. All at once Hitler was screaming, denouncing the enemies of Germany, the vast, shadowy international conspiracy of Jews and Bolsheviks and foreigners and subhumans who wanted to destroy the country's greatness, the greatness that he had restored. He begged, he pleaded, he threatened, playing on the emotions of the audience like a master musician on a familiar instrument. One final scream of Deutschland, 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 fist stabbing the air, the whole body throbbing with power like an electric cable, and the speech was over. The hall exploded with applause. Ace found that she was shaking, tears streaming down her face. In the darkness she heard the doctor's voice. Psychological rape and murder. That's what a German poet called Hitler's speeches. It was like magic, said Ace. Black magic. You saw how he started off, totally unimpressive. Ace nodded. If he'd gone on like that, he'd have been booed off the stage at a Brownies meeting. Ah, but he didn't, did he? He suddenly kicked into overdrive. And can you remember what he actually said in the speech? Not really. Just a lot of vague warnings about Germany being in danger. Who from? I don't know. Jews, communists, capitalists, foreigners, the Salvation Army, Little Green Men, everybody. Exactly. And can you remember any plans or policies, anything specific he was going to do about all this danger? She thought hard. No, just a lot of stuff about blood and soil and the sacred spirit of the Aryan race. There you are then, said the doctor. He rambles on about unknown dangers looming from vague enemies, and makes mystery appeals to some hazy spirit of the race. An airy-fairy nonsense. But you saw the effect it had. Ace nodded. I even felt it. Somehow he's bypassing sense and reason and logic altogether, and broadcasting basic signals on the psychic wave band. Fear, hatred, paranoia. Then togetherness, reassurance, group feelings. Massive chunks of raw emotion pumped out with enormous power. So how's it done? I think he's being boosted, used as a transmitter. The doctor broke off as the door to their box was flung open. An angry voice shouted, Hands up! You are under arrest!